Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final episode of podcast organized by myself, Gary, and Nick from Pocket Square. So time flies. Actually, this is the first. This is the last episode. We have been conducting our interview since 15th of May, to be very very specific on that day. And it has been like almost 6 months, which you can probably imagine we have been like organizing and busy with other things. Therefore, finally, five episodes took like 6 months because along the way we actually plan out and also be getting other guests. So I think this even though it's just a 5 small projects, but I think it's a huge achievement, I would say, because we are talking about a lot of things that architects don't tend to think or talk about in the public. So finally, and hopefully later on we can come out with a series of activity or perhaps a group chat for discourse in terms of Malaysian architecture or creative practice. So without further ado, I do have Nick online. So Nick, would you like to say anything after we have been doing along the way?
No, I'm happy to be doing the fifth episode, and hopefully, if it get us momentum, we can do it for even longer.
Yeah. I mean, along the way, just a quick recap. So for the first one, we were talking about market and demand, which we are talking about, like the whole idea and economy of creative practice in Malaysia. I mean, all the 5 episodes are very Malaysian based. The second episode, we got David Yeo to talk about resources management and cost. The third one, we will talk about fee and money making. Unfortunately, we didn't get anyone because it's somehow a lot of people don't talk about it. And then the fourth one, we got Cash Fee from Studio 3. It was a very, very brilliant guest who talked about what we need to know to run an architecture practice. And today we're going to talk about social media and marketing. To get this started, just to revisit what our background. So myself as an office manager in the architecture practice in London, is a small practice and we primarily do private residential. I think for Nick as well, his works are primarily driven by the residential and private residential sector. So am I right, Nick? I'm not sure if you have been doing
Yeah, you can say so. Yeah,
other things out as well. So I think
yep.
this discussion will be very interesting in a way because it will very focused and laser point into private residential. But of course, in the future, we would love to talk to any other practices who have been doing in community project, commercial project, or even larger development project. So perhaps to get it started, Nick, would you like to briefly tell us about what's your social media and marketing in terms of strategies? What are the platforms that you use to boost your reputation in a way? I mean, it's not necessary to be super useful. It's not like, if we use Instagram, not necessarily we can get like 50% or 70% of leads from Instagram. It depends because from what I know in my practice, we don't usually use that as a leads generator. But I wonder what's your thought in this.
So at the moment we are in Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn a little bit, but it's a bit more on a personal front. So meaning it's more of my profile instead of the company's profile.
Yeah.
Initially, I think it started off as just a place for exposure, meaning for the clients to know about us, and we post all the normal, the projects that we've done or the works that we do. But I think recently I've started to put a lot more effort into it and questioning, the role of social media and what types of content to post, because a lot of I would say a lot of people just put their works up on social media almost like a platform for their portfolio.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of them has done successfully in terms of garnering followers, but I'm trying to test it out a bit more on how, because social media, first of all, is social, so I'm trying to question how it works and possibly what benefit it can do for us as a organization.
Yeah.
And I don't want to forego the social part, because it's social media, it's not just posting portfolio, because that's what the websites are for. That's a bit more of the formal avenue. And so I think on Facebook is a bit more formal, but on Instagram I tend to put a bit more of my personal things, because for me even though it's a company, at the end of the day, they are dealing with me. So that I want to put a bit more on the personal front to it. And in that sense, Instagram has a bit more, I have a bit more success in Instagram when it comes to lead generation.
You mentioned about there are two traits from the social media trajectory in terms of there are two things. One is personal and one is much more professional side. But seems like in Instagram you tend to just have one account because that's kind of like your work Instagram. But I mean, how does that relate in a way? Do you see like Kashfi mentioned earlier in the previous episode saying that in a work Instagram account shouldn't just include all the works, but rather also about the people. So I wonder, do you think that there is a necessary thing to split into another account for work so that people will follow the work account rather than a personal account? I mean, there are pros and cons, because the reason why I think the good thing about consolidate both account into one, because it allows you to understand, because in the end design is a very personal thing. So if let's say they follow Nick, they will know that Nick is the designer, and also Pocket Square is Nick in a way, because in the end Pocket Square at this moment is not like, like a huge company yet, but then if even though it's a huge company, but then they will remember, okay, if I wanted to look for interior designer, I will look for Nick rather than Pocket Square. But in the end, by legislation and also proper contract, of course it will under Pocket Square Limited. And then I mean, in this case, then how do you see the future, like next step? Do you feel like you need to split into two accounts so that one is more personal, one is more career based?
I think previously when I was deciding on this direction, a lot of my thinking is based off this book called The Cell. It's written by Frederick Kirkland. So it's a well-known real estate or realtor based in New York, and then his advice was to consolidate it into one, which is or maybe because I've been following his formula, so I tend to agree with it in a way that even though so happened because of my market, I'm dealing with residential homeowners. So when dealing with them, you're not hiring a company for on the client side. You're not hiring a company. You're hiring perhaps the person who is dealing with you, from that company. So I wanted to put a personal face on that front. And at the moment, the people that have approached me on Instagram, where I post a lot of my personal side as well, has been rather decent, because they've seen my personal front, and when they approach it, they know who they're talking to. Instead of on Facebook or on an email, it's more like to whom it may concern. So when they approach me on Instagram, it's more like, hey Nick, they know my name and they know my personal side. They know they know I have children. So when and a lot of my clientele, they are like families with children. So when I talk about children's room or children related design, they know I'm coming from a place of empathy. They know where I'm coming from. So that has helped, and obviously the nature of communication when they approach me is a lot friendlier than on Facebook. And because I know the reason is because I post more personal stuff on my Instagram, and it has worked for me. And obviously I'm trying to continue that trend.
Speaking of like coming back to the idea of social media, you mentioned about Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. How has that been working well in terms of generating leads? Do you find social media, because for me, I think at some point social media is purely for existence in a way. It's sort of like creating an impact within the architect's circle rather than creating a new leads. Of course, it works differently for other practices. There are practices who purely using Instagram as a leads generation generator. I understand that, but there are practices, because it seems to be Instagram is like a name card now. So rather than generating a new leads, the name card sort of presenting a certain practice front and also language and also portfolio rather than creating a leads. So therefore, when it comes to like winning an award or things like this, sort of will appear on Instagram rather than creating new leads, but rather to telling and sharing with others. So I wonder how would that work with for you? Because for me, I think for us it's different, because we sort of like depends on past clients or or a connection rather than the Instagram?
I think it works well as an exposure channel in terms of it's almost like advertisement, right? You're putting your stuff in there, you're putting your works in there. Maybe I'm a bit biased because my clientele is mostly homeowners. So I think it works well for me to have the personal side of it. Obviously, if you're doing commercial side, and your clientele is on the corporate side, I doubt the boss who's surfing Instagram who's is gonna find you and contact you is probably the person who's in charge of maybe procurement. So I find that sometimes, and I think it's a bit of clashing with I don't know. I guess the registered architects can correct me if I'm wrong, because in the architects, maybe the conduct, you're not supposed to really advertise yourself. So this whole social media thing has really challenged that assumption. And I see a lot of companies, they get a lot of followers by posting just their works, but personally I find that it's a bit just lazy social media marketing, because you're just posting whatever stuff on your Facebook and on your website. So in a way, you're not really encouraging or giving excuses for followers to follow you on multiple fronts, because all the contents are the same. So I'm also trying to balance between what I do daily operationally for my company and what I need to post on social media. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the contents and try to, the formula for social media these days, what they say is like E and E. It's either you educate or you entertain. I'm not trying to just post my work because that's what the website is for.
I think speaking of that, like, of course, Instagram, when the numbers of followers does really create a certain impact. In a way, if let's say I'm a client and I'm been looking for interior designer, I might shortlist a few, like maybe 5 or 10, and then numbers of followers somehow like a reviews on Google's and then people tend to see, is this designer credible or not. We are just talking on one side on Instagram. Of course, along the way we notice that because Instagram is tend to be more pointed at the younger crowds, we are looking at the people who actually use Instagram not just for looking into like the so-called archipon or architecture or interior designer, but also they are connecting with their friends and they have been following their friend or followed by their friends. So Instagram is sort of like getting into a certain personal level rather than Facebook. Facebook is like, if a company follow you as a personal account, they can see you. But then for Instagram, they kind of like, you can follow but another one cannot follow back kind of thing. So like Facebook, of course, they are also follow function and everything. But you just now mentioned about the content. How long do you spend per week in curating or producing content? Or do you find it like, okay, since I'm going to do this for clients, I'll just put it nicer on Instagram?
Usually my first 2 hours of the day is towards generating or thinking about the social media content, and then depends on the platform. So sometimes I will write blogs on my website, and then but most of the time recently, I would say the past 2 years or so, the focus has been on Instagram. For the past, I think once I've concerted this effort on Instagram, I was able to triple the followers on Instagram, and I've gotten a lot of the leads on Instagram versus Facebook, even though on Facebook I have more followers.
Okay.
Because I think on Facebook I do more paid boost content and boosting the post. So I think definitely quality means a lot more than Instagram. I've generated more leads from Instagram than on Facebook. I like the interaction that I'm getting on Instagram, because a lot of them that approach me is like, hey Nick, I've been stalking you for a while, and it's a lot more friendly approach, and I really like that, and that's why I'm trying to continue or improve the effort on Instagram.
So you also mentioned about LinkedIn. How does that work in terms of like getting private residential projects? It's a different ball game, because it seems like LinkedIn is much more functioning well in terms of like getting bigger projects, like developers, they might be there. Of course, the prior residents, of course, there might be some higher levels of a certain company. They might be using LinkedIn, and then they notice, oh, okay, I might need an interior designer to design my house as well. And also, I think LinkedIn, I'm not sure how will that helpful in terms of like exposing, in terms of exposure, and also leading yourself to meet like new homeowners, for example, and also the association, they have been helping new young people to get new houses, or they might need to renovate for rent or things like this. So do you find LinkedIn is helpful in this sense?
At the moment, maybe because I haven't seen the result and I haven't really put in a lot of effort on LinkedIn yet. Of course, all these social platforms, they want you to post natively, meaning instead of just sharing link, they want you to post on the platform itself. And honestly, I haven't really spent a lot of effort and time on LinkedIn. So a lot of times I'm just sharing link on the blog post that I've written on my website. So at the moment, currently, I'm just using it as purely just for exposure, in a way, advertisement. But I haven't really explored it to the full yet because I feel that I haven't really maximized or squeezed every juice out of Instagram yet. So I'm trying to figure that out and not to diversify my effort and try to focus into one platform and see
Yeah.
what's the most I can get out of one.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'm sure there is a like a specialized job which is very interesting in the last 20 years or 30 years before. You don't see this job exist before. It's called social media coordinator or social media expert, who actually help the companies to run their social media. I'm not sure what's your thought in this, because for the practice where I'm working now, I'm the person who actually curating, because at some point I realized one is video is one thing is up and rising. It doesn't really work in my opinion, because it depends on the crowd that or people who follow your page. The second thing is I realized a lot of people more interested in looking at construction site, for example. They enjoy looking into the process rather than the outcome. Also gain a lot of attention, and that's the two things that I realized. And so I'm not sure what happened in Malaysia. How do you see that? Because in Malaysia, like Cash Free is a good example. Like I noticed his Instagram page. I mean, put followers aside, because I think that's really not fair at some point. Because I'm not saying that is. I mean, I do recognize the Cash Free Studio 3. They are producing a really really good works. But the reason why I want to put it aside, because there are other pages they can simply just buy followers, and then it doesn't really valid in this sense, because the quantity of the followers doesn't justify the quality in some certain pages. So that really makes me think like, okay, how helpful and how critical should we curate our content? And in that case, do you find like certain lists will send you a certain post that you have decided and say, hey, I want to design my book like what you did in this house. I like the living room that you designed in this house, and I want to combine them together, become one. So technically, they are using your Instagram as the Pinterest and then using for their description. So I mean, it sounds quite helpful, but I'm not sure if you came across any experience like this.
I think at the end of the day, it really depends on the strategy for your social media. Um, the good thing about digital avenue is that you can track it, whether you can, or you can always ask the client, oh, how did you, I always ask them, oh, how did you come across us? Is it through Instagram or through Facebook? That's how we track which social media platform is the most effective. So for me, it's very important for the strategy. Are you trying to get more leads, or is it just the exposure? But for me, I use Instagram. Partly is exposure, and the content I try to curate it to attract a certain clientele that I want to attract. Say if I want to attract more residential type projects, obviously I wouldn't go on posting commercial projects that I may have. Try to create that as be as consistent as possible to my brand and what I'm trying to create in the company. Obviously, it's easier because it's a small company and I'm doing it myself, so I can control that. Previously I was trying to hire writers to write the blogs, but I feel that it's not really authentic because it doesn't really sound like me. So I wanted to be as consistent
Yeah,
and
yeah.
as true to the message of the brand as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very true because I think I mean, personally in my previous experience, we came across this decision also. Should we just, delegate my job to someone else so that I can focus on other things else? And we come to a point where it's not really helpful because me myself being in the office, I can see what's going on in a certain project and also what's special about certain project, and I can share and I can write about it because the architect told me about this kind of information rather than I'm writing on my own because it would be so different. Okay. I mean, how about like what are the key things in terms of private residential? Perhaps I can share a little bit. I think referral and testimonial and feedback or reviews really really helpful for me in my current practice, because I think words of mouth works better than Instagram or LinkedIn or anything else, in my opinion. Not sure how does that work for you? Like, what's the critical point to generate leads in terms of marketing?
I think for me, I'm just trying to keep the language or the message that I'm delivering across the different platforms. Of course, because different platforms, they prioritize different medium. So for example, Instagram is a bit more visual, whereas LinkedIn or the website, the blogs is a bit more verbal or more written content. But regardless of the medium, I'm just always trying to keep it um try to be a bit more consistent and always try to be central to what the concerns of my target market is.
Yeah,
So for example, like private residences is always the concern is always, the process or the bad reputation that certain contractors or builders may have in the industry,
yeah.
maybe budget concerns. I don't think ideas are scarce because right now with
Mm,
social media or Instagram or Pinterest, there's plenty of ideas. So I don't think anyone is short of ideas. Um, so and then certain posts I may have will try to address that issue. Like on my blog, I write a lot about materials or budget concerns or how to get around certain difficulty that they may have
yeah.
around builders maybe. Yeah, so I'm still trying to find out more, talking to people and find out what concerns they may have.
So you are saying that if, let's say, I do agree that, ideas or aesthetic or inspiration or reference are not lacking in this era where you can simply looking into a keyword, say brutalist concrete interior living room, and then it will pops out like thousands for you, right? But the reason why certain clients would like to work with you, of course, it's not just about the aesthetic, but also at the same time is the spirit and also how collaborative you can be. So that I think that's more important, because I think money is one thing, but also at the same time, how do a designer can be so frank and honest about the budget and at the same time able to find solutions for them. I think that's really differ between an experienced designer and a amateur designer, because designer can produce like super sexy drawings, but they might not be able to come out with a solution to negotiate with contractor or anything. So
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree because a lot of obviously the young designers coming up, they always think that, design is the most important thing, or people are hiring them because of their design. But then a lot of times that's not true in the real world because design, while it's important, it maybe plays 10 to 15%,
yeah.
of the whole project. So for my mentality, it's always that design will help, good design will help you open the door to maybe the clients, but at the end of the day, it helps you open the door, but you still need to deliver in other aspect that is non-design. For
Mm,
example, customer service, probably pricing, yeah, like costing and the execution of the works. So I would say that good design, maybe they will bring the client to us, but at the end, when we deliver the project and they're satisfied with it, most of the time they're not satisfied just because of the design. They're
yeah.
happy with design, but a lot of times they're satisfied because you've treated them with respect. You have given them a great customer service. Given them great value for money, and
Mm,
the experience has given them a very stress-free 3 to 6 months, that's might be a very different perspective from aspiring designers, because they always think that designer is the be all and end all.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, apart from social media that we've been talking about, but also there are other sectors that we haven't touched on when we talk about marketing. The in my perception and definition of marketing is the moment that come out from your word. It's a marketing. And also Ogilvy is the like an agency in marketing. Also mentioned that there's no such thing as bad marketing, because the moment that you throw something out, it's already a marketing. It doesn't care if it's good or bad, because the whole point of marketing is to get it out. So if that's the case, and we haven't talked about like website, and also how do you talk to people, and also other soft skills that we didn't mention, like presentation skill. How do you beat a project in front of a client that who might have thousands of troubles, but they are so worried about leaking their work about other insulation, or they are so worried that the room is not cold enough, or things like this. So would you like to shed a little light on that sense, like the soft skill side, where a lot of
I
young
think
designers perhaps not given this kind of advice? If let's say they are not exposed to work environment, they straight away jump into the Instagram and say, okay, I can design something like this.
I think there's always been this fine line between marketing and branding. So I think what you mentioned about things that you mentioned, like maybe me as the company owner, whatever that I say is marketing. I feel that it's more a bit on the branding. It's about what you say. Is it consistent with maybe what you post on social media? If it's consistent, then I think it helps to strengthen the brand. So if let's say if my brand is about delivering premium products, then if that's on my social media, but when they meet me in person, am I saying the same thing that supports this brand? If one side I'm talking about premium products and delivery, and on face to face I'm talking about cutting corners and delivering cheap methods, then so it's not very consistent to the brand.
Yeah.
I feel that the whole marketing effort is about finding interesting ways to show the value that you have, that you can provide to your clientele.
Yeah.
If it's owner, maybe the value is about giving them a very stress-free, because they are not corporate people, they are dealing with their own home, so it's a very personal experience. So if let's say like for example, our focus is more on the customer service, then it's about finding interesting ways to show how we can provide good customer service.
Yeah.
And if it's corporate clients, then I guess it's the challenge is how to show whatever they are dealing with, how they can provide the best value. Because if let's say your clientele is on a corporate, and let's say you're providing values to developers, I doubt the developers or the head of the developer is the one that's going to serve on social media and find you and rope you in. It's probably maybe the marketing manager or the project manager. So it's very important to know who your direct clientele is. Of course, if we are dealing with direct homeowners, I know who we are dealing with. Whereas if you're dealing with, say, B2B, business to business, you need to know who you are trying to target.
Because I realized on Instagram, of course, there are different kind of targets. For some account, they purely wanted to come out because they want to attract the students to create a certain inspiration or think about a certain detail. I mean, of course, for designers as well, but they are much more centric for student. Let's say learning about SketchUp or AutoCAD. Okay, fine. They are certain niche about that, and also there are certain developers they are targeting into all sort of. I mean, it's very interesting about like Instagram or social media. They really target into, because they exist there, and they don't care if let's say how many people follow them, but somehow the content are actually like for targeting on a certain group of people, but other groups somehow get interested and follow them as well. This happened in terms of like a lot of big architecture practice all around the world. For example, when we look into Foster and Partner, they obviously don't care about the people who actually follow them, because I think because the followers they are not like millionaires who are actually don't know how to spend the money and hire Foster and partner to design skyscrapers. It might be the case, but I don't think so, because if let's say they are super rich, they will straight away go to, like a competition to shortlist a few companies like Foster versus Zaha for or OMA, and then they fight together rather than using Instagram in a rather informal way. But of course that doesn't stop the students to follow the Foster and partner because they are famous in a way. But that leads to my question in terms of how do you see in Malaysia landscape where marketing, branding, public relations seems like that's the thing that we don't talk about, that because in Malaysia, PAM award, it tends to be go for those building, but how about interior? How about journalists? Oh, hello.
Yeah, I think because it's quite this social media thing is quite I think it's probably quite new in a lot of like design company, and I did think of this as well, especially when I'm instead of posting contents about finished work. So sometimes I do post about work in progress, or sometimes certain visuals or rendering. And I do think that okay, maybe my target clientele are not really interested in visuals. They want to finish or renderings. They are more interested on the finished products. But then if there are practitioners or even students that likes this type of content or follow me, it might lead to other things or recommendations. So I'm always very open about, or I always try to experiment new content media and see how my followers or potential followers react to it.
I mean, in
And we are
Malaysia,
open to,
yeah, sorry. In Malaysia, do you have to approach a journalist to write something about your project to get featured on newspaper or magazine? I mean, of course, it comes to a point where how many newspaper or magazine can write about interior architecture? That's the first thing first.
I think you can do that. But someone in the journalism sector has told me that a lot of times they are short of this sort of design or architecture related content. So they're always seeking out for new one, but I
Ah,
feel so they're not sure. So obviously I'm sure if you're willing to pay for it, there are people who's willing to take paid content. But in general, or at least 2-3 years ago, what I've been told is that they are short of this type of content. So maybe they're venturing. I know Tetler Malaysia are reaching out a bit more
yeah,
on this type of design content. Yeah.
yeah. So means that they are actually journalism writing about it, and they are keen to write about it rather than keeping silent or not writing about it. Rather, they would focus on food or fashion or other things also.
I
It
think
does.
there are, but it's always I feel that at the moment, maybe the way of the writing is always tagged on to something bigger, like maybe the property sector instead of
Right,
design being a topic on its own,
right.
which is not a bad thing because people need to find a way to relate to these topics. Because I would say, not everyone is so interested in design related. Maybe they're only interested insofar as how it relates to their own life.
Yeah,
Maybe because they're interested in design because of there's a need at the moment, but it's not that they go on every day looking for the latest design trends.
yeah. Okay. But I'm just curious, like when it comes to that, I mean, do you actually need to put effort or spend some money into getting there, or so far it's more like you're getting their responses and journalists to write about interior? I mean, I mean, even though it's whether it's a special design or custom design or something about unique, but I do think that even though ordinary or anything related to design should share on the publication to talk about that. So I mean, how about yourself? Do you actually need to engage with journalists to write about your works, or has
At the
any
moment, I
journalist?
haven't tried it yet. I think the only paid content I've done is to boost my project photos on Facebook. But that's about it, but I'm always open to new marketing methods, because at the moment, they always say, if you like what you're getting, just continue what you're doing. So at the
Yeah.
moment, we have sufficient. Now, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because I would say walk-in, not physically walk-in, like people who are approaching us from our website and social media, generates about 80 to 85% of our leads
I
instead of
see.
word of mouth.
I see.
So which I feel that, I'm satisfied with it, so I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing,
I see.
instead of relying just on word of mouth, which I know a lot of businesses, especially in the design community, they rely on word of mouth, and it generates maybe 90% of their business, which, I'm not saying that to criticize or to diss them. I find it quite envious. So I will always ask them how maybe there are not enough people passing around good words about our company. I don't know. But the thing about word of mouth is that you can't really control the messaging. The thing is about with you know inbound marketing is that you can control what you're saying and what you want to say about your
Yeah,
company and
yeah,
your
yeah.
services.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it has worked for us. So I just want to continue that effort and perhaps improve it. But
Yeah.
at the moment, because of how involved I am with the daily operations, sometimes I need to limit my involvement in social media. But I would like to um, improve that.
I think I do quite like the fact that you mentioned about the pros and cons in terms of word of mouth as the main channel, because the danger is that even though you do a good job, but how often the client would actually recommend you to their friends or their clients to tell you that, okay, Nick is good, I worked with him before, and then there's a danger in a way. You have to serve them quite well to ensure that they are the good one, because that's the channel
Yeah,
that, yeah.
and it's true, and it's not only that. It's about what are they saying about you that is good. Because there's this book called 101 Things I Learned in Business School. I think there's a book called 100 Things I Learned in Architecture School as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
there's this topic that is said that what you sell and what clients buy may be two different things. So you may be, if let's say, for example, a good example would be like a fresh graduate. You may be selling your talent as a designer, but maybe probably your clients are buying you or your services because you are cheap, because you're a fresh grad and you don't have much experience. So it's the same thing. So for example, if people are passing around words that I do good work, but because I'm cheap, that might not be necessarily be the message that I want to send out. For example, especially if my company is small and I want to focus on quality than quantity, so I may want to be perceived as someone who is expensive or a bit more premium. But if the word gets around that I'm actually cheap, or I always reply my message within 10 minutes, it might not be exactly the message that I want passed around. So that's the weakness about word of mouth. I feel that sometimes word of mouth, obviously, it's people like it because they don't really have to do much. They're relying on other people to do the work of passing the message around. So maybe I'm just saying that because I'm biased, because word of mouth generates only about
Yeah,
5 to
yeah, yeah.
10% of our business. So if another person or designer might have an opposing view.
Yeah, yeah. I think I totally understand. Therefore, if let's say you know that the leads, that channel doesn't really work for you, then don't work on it. You work on the other things that you know where you can bring more benefit. Okay. I think we had enough, quite a lot, and cover quite a lot in terms of marketing. Of course there are other sectors that we don't talk about, for example, like a public relation, where in Malaysian market we tend to neglect it a little. We haven't talked about awards, because in Malaysia, since will be awards is quite little, it's quite narrow, and also the whole industry in terms of entertainment industry, they don't talk about that a lot. When you compare to UK, they have like grand design, which seems to be like a big thing. Extraordinary design, like TV channel 4, they do have this kind of series of channel. And I'm sure in Malaysia, like TV3 or 8TV, they do in a, like a public, not just about Astro, this kind of thing. They do have like this kind of channel for talking about like interior design, but seems like they're only focusing on the grand design, like the big projects or the expensive, like with marble and everything. It seems to be that kind of a trend. But of course, we do see like on YouTube, talks about like passive design, talks about like projects that is unique. I think that's also coming up and rising. But of course, we would love to know more about that, and also how helpful the PAM can be helpful in the sense to generate leads or connecting the clients to the architects or designers. That seems to be it's not a thing because from what I experienced here, there is a platform where it's actually by Reba. So if let's say any client who are interested to renovate their house, they can write to Reba and then Reba automatic filter maybe, to choose that, let's say which borough that you are working in, what kind of skill, what kind of a scope of work that you are good at, and then they will automatic matchmaking for you. So that's the thing I'm not sure in Malaysia. So I mean, a lot of things that we yet to explore. Hopefully in the future we can get someone, to talk about this rather than I think there's a need to talk to someone who are actually running the platforms rather than we as a user to come out with our feedback, but nothing could be improved or created. So maybe to close off this one, I think it's quite significant to close off this episode. It's kind of like the first season. So Nick, if you have anything to share, it would be great.
No, I think hopefully it has been insightful to the listeners, and I hope that there will be more and more talks about the daily operations and nitty-gritty things like that. Not just for the business owner, but for practitioners for them to be, aware about the runnings of the whole industry,
Yeah.
rather than just to be confined about doing drawings or just about their scope of works in the company. And I hope to instigate more and more conversations like this. And because the interesting thing about running practices and doing in a business is that if you ask 50 people, there'll probably be 50 different opinions, and we can start to learn from each other and, talk about things in their own experience. For example, I'm not really in the architecture scene, so I will get different opinions from people on how they think about the architect's minimum scale of fees. I'm sure that will generate a lot of interesting um, opinions from maybe the practitioners themselves and also the business owner. Maybe they have it's like a white elephant in the room about cutting the minimum scale of fees and nobody following actually that schedule.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know maybe the architectural owner's point of view on on how they think about it. Hopefully
Yeah.
this will create a wave or momentum on people discussing about things that I think in general Asians or in general people just don't talk about money in public. So hopefully we can, or business related things. So hopefully we can create this few episodes has created an awareness on and people wanting to talk about it.
Yeah. I think I think that has been the motivation since our 5 episodes that we have been talking about. I mean, it's not saying, of course, there are all the practices they have been doing. Of course, they have been doing business and they know how their business running. But it's just that we would love to talk more about it because sometimes, well, I mean, it's critical to learn from each other anyway. I mean, sometimes even though you might be doing good and you don't want to listen to the others, that's fine. I respect that. But sometimes we would love to invite the practices to share more as well, because if let's say a practice is doing well, and then hopefully we can inspire more, whether it's old or young generations, they would like to know about what's going on in business nowadays, because every business seems to be turning every changes every 1 year or every 2 years, so everyone needs to make a change anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to learn from each other from different perspectives as well, because a few years ago, my team sort of like we had an internal meeting and they sort of asked me why do I try to keep a certain minimum profit margin in the project and why I just don't accept it. Obviously, affected because it was their baby. They started the design, but then it didn't follow through to the construction because we, as a company, we couldn't agree on a fee. And I told them that if I accepted the job on a lower profit margin, I needed to accept more jobs to cover the loss. And the only person who's going to be affected which is the person who's running the project. So at the end of the day, they need to do more work to cover the same profit.
Yeah.
And then they finally knew why I was making a certain decisions for the company, you know. So it's conversations like that. So sometimes need to help both parties to understand each other.
Yeah, yeah. And also because even though a certain architect really like to work with that project, but from another side, we also don't want your colleague to work extra time, to work on other project, because that's the interesting thing about construction and design is that even though it's almost, even one is like a small budget, another one is big budget, you have to go through the same process in a way, but each process is longer in a way. That's what I realized, because it's not saying that because you are small project means that you can skip design, because you still need to come up with design and floor plans and everything. Yeah, so
Yeah, and actually, sometimes the smaller or lower budget projects requires more attention because there's more things to control. Whereas the bigger projects or the more high value one, you are you have more allowance to play around with. There's more room for mistakes, maybe. Whereas the smallest project one requires closer attention.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's very true. And then I've been working on like small projects, and I do feel that way. So even though you're working on a 500,000 project or just 100,000 project, you still need to go through tender. You still need to work with contractor. You can't escape from
Yeah,
that. I
yeah,
mean,
it's true, and it's like the analogy that I always use, to homeowners or people who may not understand this concept fully, is that whether you're washing 10 pieces of clothing versus 20, it's not 50% and 100% of your effort. If you're washing, 10 pieces of clothing, you still need to, I don't know, bring your laundry basket down to the washer.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
the washing machine still operates the same time. So that's what I always try to the analogy that I always try to bring up.
Interesting. That's actually good analogy, actually. Okay. For me, myself, first of all, thanks a lot, Nick, for along the way. It's like been very, very supportive. And thanks to another Nick who actually connecting us up. So it has been really, really wonderful and very mind-blowing at some point as well. A lot of new things that I'm taking in, and hopefully all our listeners get inspired, and feel free to get in touch with us. You can, of course, you can find us on Instagram by the time this is published. Talk to us if you have any question, like, if you are a young practitioner, you don't know what to do and you don't know how to tackle which part of your business, for example, financial or marketing, or creating content, or even knowing what do you need to run, what do you need to know to run a creative practice. You can always talk to us, even though we are not like earning like millions or billions dollar, but then we are always happy to talk to you, and we can do brainstorm, because I think that's the beauty of learning from each other. So yeah, thanks a lot for listening throughout the 5 episodes, or you if you just listen to one, that's fine as well. But we are always here, and we are always happy and open for all sort of conversation. So yeah, I guess that's it for the final episode, and this is it for the season 1, and hopefully we can catch up more. Yeah, if you are looking for any collaboration, just look for us. If you like to get us on board or anything, I'm sure Nick and myself would be happy to provide any supportive advice, or perhaps we can work something out. Okay, so thanks a lot, Nick. I guess it's quite a long day for you as well. And tomorrow is election day. Perhaps hopefully we can bring a better Malaysia as well. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Nick. Cheers.
Thank you.